Hey guys, we're super excited. We are just starting our Bible in 90 Days adventure. And this is our first video. We're going to be making videos every week. So the staff is reading a week ahead. So that
and our council.
That's true. Mm-hmm. Staff and council and wives, because I gave them bookmarks too.
Yeah.
And the idea is that we can make these videos kind of on like what's upcoming, what you're going to be reading this week. And I have a multitude of questions always for Pastor Jeff. So I'm sure that you guys do too. So if we could preemptively talk about things, ask questions, and
do I get to ask you questions back too?
Yeah, sure.
Sweet.
But I'll be like, and Uno reverse, you know? So anyway, today we wanted to talk about Passover. We were reading through Exodus, and it's in Exodus 12 that they talk about the Passover. But before that, it's kind of the 9 other plagues of Egypt. And then,
well, Passover is not a plague, so we can say all 10.
I thought that the firstborn was the 10th plague.
All right, sure, yeah. The Passover, all right.
Okay,
we're close enough, yeah.
Okay, so there are 10 plagues.
Yeah, the Passover is the celebration that like
right.
So,
okay,
yeah.
so do you want to explain kind of like Passover, the plagues that, I mean, we don't have to go over all of them, but just like why.
Yeah.
So the Israelites were in Egypt.
They were, yeah.
And they were not being treated well.
Right, Joseph takes them all there, and they're doing well, and then somebody shows up who doesn't treat them so well, right?
Yeah, and they can't leave. They're being held there, basically.
Yeah.
And the Pharaoh won't let them leave, which also is another question I have throughout all the plagues. At the very end, it says, and Moses went to the Pharaoh, but the Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God. Mm. And so if God wanted them to leave, why did he harden the Pharaoh's heart?
Yeah, wow, so many questions here.
I know.
We'll try to break into a couple of them. But it was interesting at the beginning of the Passover, at the beginning of the plagues here in Egypt, Moses just asked if they can take a 3-day journey out to go worship, and Pharaoh says no. And so as it progresses, we go from we're no longer taking our 3-day journey, we're just leaving for good. But if you read it, it's kind of interesting, and probably should have looked at this ahead of time because I don't recall the exact amount, but I think the first 6 times that Moses goes up and talks to Pharaoh, it talks about Pharaoh hardening his own heart. And then later on, we get this idea that, okay, maybe the plagues are getting big enough that Pharaoh would have changed his mind. But you see that Pharaoh gets to make his own decision at the beginning. And then when he says, no, I think I'm bigger than Moses, silly little God. And yet you start getting all these plagues. I think by the end, then God said, you know what? Pharaoh made his decision. Let's make sure he keeps going in that one so that people can see who God really is.
So basically, he was hardening his own heart, wouldn't let them leave, or wouldn't let them have their 3-day and then eventually leave for good like they wanted to. So God was like, let's keep going with that.
Yeah.
So that I can show you like what I'm all about, what I can do.
Absolutely.
And he did. Yeah. Boy, did he.
With
the plagues, man.
Yeah.
I was reading and I was like, I would not like to have been there.
Yeah.
As anyone involved in this situation. I'd just be like, I just want to get out of here real quick. Maybe if they look that way, I could leave really quick. They'll be able to.
And it's interesting because the first few plagues affect everybody, but as you go on, then there's quite a few plagues that affect only the Egyptians, and then certainly the last one, the death of the firstborn, there affects kind of a stranger subset, because the idea that we get is that there might have been a few Egyptians who also painted their door frames with blood there to signal, hey, can we have
we also
angry guy killing people pass over our house? They
were like, the Pharaoh's kind of going crazy. We think that they should leave too.
Yeah, we've seen what this guy can do. I don't want to mess with him.
Yes. And it was interesting too, because the plague of the firstborn, it's not just like the firstborn people. It's firstborn animals, firstborn. Yeah. Is it the firstborn son of everybody?
I think it just says firstborn, which probably implies son, but I don't. Should have looked at that too. I don't think it says son, but I'm pretty sure that's what it would imply.
Like back in the time, the firstborn would always have been like.
Right. Yeah. The place of honor there. So.
Yes. They paint the blood over the door frames, and that signifies that the Lord, the Destroyer, should pass over their house, not kill the firstborn of their house.
Yeah. And
it happens, and then everyone's crying all over Egypt.
Lots of loud crying, you bet.
Yeah, wailing. And then we're commanded basically then the Passover celebration is to celebrate the fact that God passed over
Yeah.
these houses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Celebrate that. I mean, not just that he passed over those houses, but I think it's a little bit bigger than that, because especially as you see as it develops through the rest of the Old Testament and then into the New, it's a celebration that God rescued his people. It's a way of remembering, hey, we were slaves in Egypt and God freed us from that. He frees us from our past. So I think the first one was just, yay, our kids didn't get killed, But as it continues and you keep celebrating it, it's no longer
It's like, look at our God, it's like what he does.
He rescued us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he even talks about that in Genesis. He says that it's going to happen, that they'll be held and that he'll rescue them eventually, and that it's like a whole thing.
And that, maybe this is a little bit too much, but you get the 10 Commandments after this part. So God rescues everybody, and then he says, and here's how you should live, which I think has a lot of important correlations.
So they're not like, I'm rescuing you because you've lived the way I wanted you to.
Yeah. I'm rescuing you because I chose you, and then after I rescue you, then I show you, hey, now because we've got this relationship, here's how you respond to me.
That's great.
Yeah.
He gives something first and then is like, and here's how you should live.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about the cloak tucked in, sandals on their feet in haste, that they're supposed to be eating part?
Right, isn't this a weird deal? As he goes through, he's like, hey, here's how you got to eat it. Make sure your shoes are on and all your stuff is tied up. And I think, you could go into a little bit of the specifics, but I think the idea behind this is God simply looking at him and saying, hey, when I do something, it's going to move fast. And when I tell you to go, I need you to be ready. So he says, gather all your belongings, get this together, get that together, even so much as, hey, that night you're going to sleep with your shoes on and all your clothes on and tucked up. And I think for us, the message there is the same that it was for the Israelites then, is be ready for when God says go. And when he says go, it's time to move.
Yeah, you got to be ready.
Yeah.
Got to be good to go. Why don't we celebrate Passover?
Why don't you celebrate Passover?
I don't know. I was just thinking about that. I was reading this. I was like, oh, gosh.
Yeah. It's a little confusing because I think for a lot of Christians, we're not entirely sure if we celebrate Passover. So kind of the idea in Scripture is that the Last Supper takes place on Passover. And it's how,
because Jesus celebrated Passover.
Yeah.
Yes.
And especially in John, that's how John marks time, like every year with the Passover. But now we have a different calendar than kind of the Hebrew Jewish calendar that was used here. And so the holidays don't align quite as well. But there's two different ideas, and one is simply that as Jesus celebrated the Passover, he kind of introduced a new thing for us to try, right? A new way for us to celebrate things with communion. And so in some ways, every time we celebrate communion, we're celebrating Passover. And I think it's even in 1 Corinthians 5. I don't remember where in there. I looked it up ahead of time and I've already forgotten. But it talks about how Jesus is now our Passover lamb. 5:6, your boasting isn't good. Don't you know that a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old yeast so that you may be a new unleavened batch as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the festival, not with the old bread leavened with malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. And so the idea, and I think you see this with kind of a lot of kind of Old Testament feasts, Jesus does this with the Sabbath really well, as he says, hey, back then it was this idea, and we're going to carry it forward, and we're going to celebrate the new idea just in a different way. And so rather than kind of the once a year celebration of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, so to speak, where we celebrate that Jesus rescued the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt, now every time we celebrate communion, we're doing the same thing. We're eating this meal that signifies that there was a sacrifice that was given, and those who accept the sacrifice are passed over in God's judgment, and we've now been rescued from.
So now it's rescuing everybody, not just.
Yeah. So I think we can say, we celebrate it, but probably not in a way that the Hebrew people would agree that we're celebrating Passover, but the way that we look at it, there was something that was celebrated. It was called this Passover. It was when God rescued his people, and now we also have the same feast that was started on the same day, and now we celebrate that see how God rescued us from our past.
Via communion.
Yeah.
Yes. Because even says right before Jesus is killed and dies on the cross and all the things, and they're having the Last Supper and it's Passover, and he says, like, take this bread as remembrance of me, and it'll be my body, and then the wine is his blood. So it's
Which were all parts of the Passover
transition
meal.
right into how Passover becomes communion for Christians, and then that's interesting.
Absolutely.
I never really thought about how we didn't celebrate. I mean, our Jewish friends celebrate Passover, and so I was always like, there's gonna be something in there.
Absolutely.
But it makes sense that then it kind of transitioned into communion, as a lot of things when Jesus died on the cross did change for us, signifying why the Jewish religion is so much different than what we do on a day-to-day basis.
And how what we do is rooted in that as well. Like there are differences, but I think a lot of people have a tendency to kind of discard a lot of that rather than to say, hey, if we don't understand the Jewish feast behind it, well, we probably don't understand what we're doing nearly as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you guys liked reading this little part of the Bible, and we're excited to get into the rest of it. I feel like the first two are easy to remember because it's Genesis, the beginning, means the beginning of everything, and then Exodus is the exit from Egypt. And so we're excited to keep going with the Bible in 90 days, and we'll keep making these videos. If you guys wanted to comment any questions for future videos, that would be awesome. And we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah. And if you haven't started reading through it yet, go ahead and just jump in now.
Yeah.
Join in with us. It'll be a great time. And
Anyone
we'll see you on
can
Sunday.
jump in anytime, yes. We'll see you on Sunday.